I just got off the phone with the one and only Jiho, the co-founder of Axie Infinity. I was able to pick his brain and ask some of the important questions that have been bouncing around in my head lately. And I have the whole conversation recorded for you, so without further ado, let's get right into it. Jiho, thank you so much for being on the show. It's such an honor to have you here. Thank you so much for coming on and answering some of the questions I've got for you.
Awesome, man. Well, yeah, I've been a longtime fan, longtime supporter, and yeah, super excited to be here. Thanks for the invite.
Of course, of course. No, it's pleasure is all mine. So Origin is finally released. How does it feel that your passion project is finally available to the public?
It's been amazing. The team worked so hard. This was a project years in the making, and the initial feedback has been great. People love the upgrade of the art, the starter axes. There's definitely a long way to go in terms of the balancing, but yeah,
Right.
we've seen over 450,000 unique accounts testing Origin so far. So yeah,
That's
we're really
amazing.
optimistic about it.
Yeah, you said 450,000. That's just in the past 2 weeks.
Exactly. You have to understand that there's no token economy in Origin, right? It's not live on mobile yet. So an 80% plus of our player base is Android on mobile. So
That's correct.
yeah.
Yeah, that's going to be big, especially when we get mobile. Now, Origin was inspired by other previous games, like Pokemon, CryptoKitties, Slay the Spire. Was Origin always the end goal for Axie battles, or is it something that sort of evolved and changed over time with working on it?
So initial conception of Origin started way back in April of 2020. So it's really, just a couple of months after the release of V2. And the idea of Origin, right, was to fix a lot of the issues that we thought would prevent V2 from being this mass market experience.
Right.
So yeah, it's been amazing. It's been a long time coming, and yeah, we're still super early in the development cycle as well, and we're gonna build it all together.
Right, right. What we have right now is just the alpha. There's still a lot of other aspects to the game that you guys plan on implementing in, like the roguelike element to the adventure mode, new cards for some of the secret classes. There's still a lot of stuff in the works, isn't that right?
So we actually released this public roadmap for Origin, and we've seen through the Origin Education Challenge, right, that that's been one of the things that has really resonated with people, and they've been making like tons of different iterations and interpretations visually of that roadmap. So
That's great. Now, I'm sure you're having just as much fun playing the game as the rest of us. Do you currently have a favorite build or a favorite strategy that you've been playing with, or are you always trying something new?
so I was playing Toxic Hot Butt Disable,
Right?
Kestrel and Gloomy. Right? So I was playing that a bit. The patch that got released last night definitely mixed things up a
Oh
bit.
my
So I've
gosh.
just been experimenting with some more like cookie cutter builds
Yeah.
today. Like I've been playing Plant Beast Rep, and it's still really early, but my initial impression is that the patch kind of got rid of a lot of the broken mechanics, and I'm sure more will be kind of uncovered now that we've switched things up a bit.
Yeah, I think people are already starting to uncover some more broken builds just from the past 12 hours. But that patch was a step in the right direction. I'm sure we're going to continue balancing more as time goes on. Now, there are a lot of aspects about Origin that is completely different from V2. Like, what would you say is your favorite new mechanic that Origin introduced to the public?
Well, I just like the fact that when I play a card, the Axie immediately springs into action. It gives a feeling of life to the game that I think is really important because Axies are creatures that we have a strong relationship with. We bond with them, we see them as uniquely ours, and to have that greater feeling of control, I think is really important.
That's definitely big. Yeah, they feel a lot more alive now. I do prefer this current version where the cards act immediately. Now, when Sky Mavis released Runes and Charms to the public, we gave everybody access to all the runes and charms. A lot of broken combos started to surface. Now, considering that power ups will be changing every season, there's some concern that some of these broken combos might not be discovered until after the season's already started. Will there be a sort of test server for testing these power ups before the season launches? And if not, what kind of internal testing will ensure that none of these broken builds make it out into the official competitive season?
Sure, that is a really important dynamic, right? The process for balancing needs to be very transparent, it needs to be very predictable, and it needs to be something that resonates with and makes sense for the community. So the Origin team is going to kind of lay out the process and the guidelines around that. I don't want to necessarily steal their thunder, but that is something that we've identified as really important. And I do think that our QA team and internal testing alone is not something that is going to be able to catch things before they're released into the public. It is possible that, right, for example, in V2, people really like the balancing buffering period where we basically would release stuff in kind of this test phase and reserve the right to make changes. So I think something similar to that will be how we approach origin balancing as well.
Right. Do you think during that off-season buffering period, the public could continue to have access to the full list of runes and charms for the sake of balancing? And then the true grind for actually unlocking and crafting those runes and charms would come once the season starts? Or is that
Something like
simply...
that, yes. Something like that makes sense, right? So we did see there was the infinite moon shard mechanic that came up, and I think that was actually a good thing for the health of the test, where right
I
a lot of
agree.
these broken runes were able to come out in the open and be abused, so that we could see right, the changes that needed to be made to them. So I think that was actually really important, and I think it's instructive for the future.
Yeah, I completely agree, and I hope whatever they decide to do, whatever the team decides to do, I'm sure will be the right call. Now, I wanted to ask, as is in the name, Axies are supposed to be creatures with infinite use cases. Now, with that in mind, what is the thought process behind ending Battles V2? Since it's already a version of the game that people enjoy, it works. Yeah, what's the thought process behind ending V2 as a playable game mode?
The idea is to allow the community to focus their time and resources on Origin and to make sure that we're not creating a split in player liquidity. So there's a strong possibility that if we were to keep them running at once, that right, it would split player liquidity, making both games not fun because you're not getting fast matches against people at your skill level. There's also, right, like we have limited resources and maintaining classic and origin at the same time would definitely be resource intensive, but we understand that right there is some demand from the community to continue playing classic, and it's not unthinkable that it gets revived later down the road as something like a builders program project where it could be maintained by the community, but I think that would be like much farther down the road.
Right, right. That was one of my future questions. Hearthstone started out with Arena, but over time added other game modes. So I was thinking, will Axie Battles Classic ever come back? And if so, is that something that you see the team doing, or do you think it's only going to be created if some of these outside builders decide to start working on it?
So the idea of adding new modes that have slightly different mechanics to Origin, I think that's interesting and is something that can definitely be explored. And maybe perhaps those modes could take aspects of Classic that people really missed.
I think the biggest factor of V2 that people really do miss is just the idea of not knowing all the variables, right? It leaves this big sense of mystery and almost like a poker aspect to it. You have to almost bluff your opponent sometimes.
I think a lot of those mechanics and that level of meta strategy, I think it can be introduced into Origin with the right tweaks, right? So
I
there's,
agree.
the talks of, right, like, making the secrets even more secret, making armor potentially a secret, right?
Yeah, I completely agree with that. If shield is completely hidden from both players, then you'll have no idea where you want to attack. So I think that could be a great way to introduce that kind of bluffing element back into the game. So the Origin launch just happened to coincide with one of the biggest hacks in crypto history. Now, I cannot imagine a more stressful situation to be in. What was the vibe of the Sky Mavis team that morning? Was there yelling, finger pointing? Were there tears shed? What was going on in everybody's head?
There's no yelling, no finger pointing, and zero tears, at least visibly from our end. I think
Right.
there
I
was an understanding that, hey, this has happened. This is
Yeah.
the new reality. What are we going to do to fix the situation as quickly as possible and ensure that this journey, this mission that we've all embarked on together continues decisively? And I'm really proud of how the community and the Sky Mavis team really stepped up and came together, really rallied. It was the hardest day of our lives, but I think looking back in 5 years, 15 years, 20 years, 50 years, we're going to be incredibly proud of the way that we comported ourselves. And that was also something that was guiding us that day. It's like, this could be a day that defines our legacy.
No, I completely agree. I was astounded by the way the team handled it and how you guys bounced back so quickly. I'm not gonna lie that there were some, just in my small corner, there was so much tension. I was worried about the future. I was like, oh no, what's gonna happen? But just seeing the confidence come from Sky Mavis was so big for morale. And yeah, definitely thank you guys for handling that the way that you did.
Thank you, man, for being a rock in the community, and I think that whole is I think like some people thought that it was just like, how can you launch Origin in a week after this has just happened, right?
Right.
And I know it was like creators like you that really helped with that launch week programming that enabled us to really pull it off.
Oh, well, I'm glad I could be of service. Anytime you need me, I'm always here. So, we now know that North Korea was behind the attack, but you guys bounced back really quickly, both bolstering security and raising $180 million dollars in just a week. And as of today, I believe we actually started to recover some of the lost funds. But as onboarding begins again for Origin, how can we be sure that nothing like this ever happens again?
Sure. So we've already taken a bunch of steps to make sure that this never happens again, right? Like we've increased the validator nodes. We're implementing much stricter internal procedures, especially around things like social engineering, doubling down on conducting audits, and we launched the bug bounty. So yeah, we're totally taking steps towards becoming anti-fragile and a zero trust organization. And yeah, this, we take full responsibility for what happened. This should never have happened. It was a very expensive lesson. And we're going 1,000 miles an hour on this rush for mainstream adoption. And, we went off the road a bit.
It happens. I feel like most of the bigger networks, once they start to achieve a certain level of success, they start getting targeted, right? And like you said earlier, I think that in the long term, this is just a bump in the road that will eventually laugh at. And I feel like it's almost like a rite of passage for a bigger crypto project. You see some success and you start getting targeted. Unfortunate as it
It's
is.
definitely really, really unfortunate and serious stuff, but I'm confident that looking back, we'll see this as a moment, a week, a month, where the community really began to band together. And I'm really proud of how everyone has handled this.
No, I completely agree with that sentiment. Now, recently we saw a teaser trailer for the new land gameplay. We saw resource gathering, farming simulations, crafting with all new materials. This is very different from the current Axie experience. How will these new mechanics that land introduces fit into the current ecosystem?
So I think the idea is that the Axie experience should not be defined by simply what exists right now. Our vision for Axie has always been an entire universe of games where your NFTs unlock access and playability to a wide variety of experiences. That's the clearest cut roadmap to ensuring that there's actual value and demand for these assets to make them the key to a constantly expanding universe. And so we now have the card battler, which has gone through various iterations, and that could still be seen as mainly one game mode. And land opens up this new design space, right, where we have building, harvesting, fighting for control of territory. So we're extremely excited. Obviously, it's a difficult journey. It's been a massive vision, right? And as we got traction, probably ahead of schedule with our other products that also, caused trade-offs and, delays with land, but also the ability to attract really, really amazing talent that dared us to dream much bigger with land. And I think you see with the new 3D art, right? I think when we were trying to just describe the decision rather than showing why we made the decision, it was a little bit too abstract for people. But now, right, when we showed that gameplay trailer, people were like, oh wow, like now this looks amazing. This
Yeah.
looks 10x better than Project K 2D demo.
No, yeah, it looks absolutely gorgeous, and I like that answer. So it's not even how is land going to fit into the current ecosystem. It's like how is the current ecosystem going to change for land? Land is an extremely limited asset. And very expensive as well. There's a total supply of around 90,000 plots and a player base of between 1.5 and 3 million between this last year. So there's fear that the gameplay will only be accessible to the largest holders. How will the Project K experience differ between a land holder and just the casual Axie player?
I think that the likely path forward involves some form of delegation of land, where if you're a landholder, you can delegate rights to use and work on that land and harvest things from that land to other parties. So
Okay.
I think that's definitely a big part of it, and it's possible that there are many different interpretations of land. It's possible that Sky Mavis could build more than one. Obviously, building one has been intense, but I think that there could be right infinite possibilities in terms of how we expand the accessibility of that experience while making sure that all traction accrues value to the existing holders of land.
So the experience for a landholder is obviously going to be greater, but say if you're in a part of a guild and that guild owns land, then that guild will be allowing its members to utilize that land. And in that sense, the casual Axie player who's maybe a part of this bigger guild could have a similar experience to a typical landholder. Is that a correct assessment?
In terms of like gameplay, I think that delegation of responsibilities and tasks, I think will be really important.
Okay. As like a wannabe game developer myself, the most exciting thing to me is the Axie software development kit. Being able to create your own use cases and mini games for Axies is so exciting to me. Has there been any progress with the SDK, or is that something that's still sort of on the back burner?
So we recently actually released something called the Axie Developer Cookbook, and that is in some ways right like the first step towards an SDK where you're getting a bunch of tools that will help make a builders program project possible and come to life. So I think the first step is just right like figuring out right what are all the different tools that people need and what are the different requirements that people need to build on top of Axie and iterating on that. So I think the SDK is maybe a blanket term that we should apply to all the different tools that can be used to enhance the experience of building on top of Axie.
Okay. So the SDK is sort of like a very broad term that you plan on implementing into multiple different facets. But I think the general consensus for what the software development kit was going to be was something similar to what Roblox has, where people are able to create their own little mini games and then sell those mini games to other people. Is that still something that's in the works, or is the idea of it going to become more broad? Yeah, I
I
guess.
mean, I think that right, like with Roblox, right, people are limited to hosting their experiences in kind of that one client, if that makes sense. Whereas with Axie, I think that there's the possibility for like infinite experiences, all siloed in their own clients, but also kind of connected through these shared assets. So that's just my interpretation of it. But yeah, I think that this idea of right being able to build experiences that are also like on top of land and kind of like uniquely enabled by that format. I think that's interesting. But I think as Phil said, that's still kind of like something that will be added on or developed as land gets more fleshed out.
Definitely. We got to take it one step at a time. I understand.
And another thing that I'll say is like we need to have the flexibility where right we do know that like land is really scarce, right? So it's like we have all these builders program projects and proposals, and right, so it's like in my opinion that is in the spirit in the original intent of the SDK. So.
Right. So there are a bunch of people now creating these alternate use cases for Axies, like Axie Super Smash Brothers, Axie War Carts, all these awesome projects we're seeing, and that is sort of like taking over what I expected the SDK to be. I think that's all I have for you, Jiho. I've ran through everything I've got. I'm sure as soon as I hang up the phone here, I'm gonna have 100 other questions pop up into my head, but that's just the nature of these things. Thank you again for coming on the show.
Awesome, man. No, thanks for the invite. Would love to do it again. Let's make this like a regular thing. And yeah, keep doing awesome stuff. I have a lot of respect for you and love your channel.
Thank you. Thank you so much. All right, I know that was long, but it was a lot of good information, and I couldn't be more excited to do more things like this in the future. Let me know what you would ask Jiho if ever given the opportunity, and until next time, thanks for watching.